Hello, everyone. I'm Tony Bernardo, Dean of UCLA Anderson, and I'm happy to welcome you to another in our series of conversations with distinguished leaders. Today, we're honored to be joined by Angela Williams, President and CEO of Easterseals. Angela Williams has been President and CEO of Easterseals since 2018, and that organization, as you may know, is a leading U.S. nonprofit provider of services and advocacy for people with disabilities, including veterans and seniors. Angela led Easterseals through its 100th anniversary in 2019, driving growth and broadening the organization's impact at the beginning of its second century. The 10th person to lead Easterseals in its history, Angela is the first African American and the first woman in 43 years to hold the post. She has 30 years of leadership experience in the nonprofit and corporate sectors. Before joining Easterseals, she was Executive Vice President, General Counsel, and Chief Administration Officer at YMCA of the USA, where she helped shape strategy and resources to help 2,700 YMCAs across the country enhance outcomes for youth and families in 10,000 communities. Welcome, Angela.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Yeah, we're so pleased you could join us. We have lots to talk about, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. We're 10 months into the pandemic, and we all know it's affected everyone, all lives in America, but in particular, the community you serve, the estimated 1 in 4 Americans living with disabilities, may be especially vulnerable to the challenges of the pandemic. And I wanted to perhaps get started by asking, what are the challenges that you as your organization and the population you serve has had to overcome in these last 8 or 9 months?
Well, thanks for asking the question. And before I answer, I do just want to say to you, thank you so much for the opportunity to participate in this wonderful speaker series. I also want to just thank Christopher Lowe, who's one of your students, who reached out and to see if I would even be willing to consider the opportunity. So again, this is such a pleasure to be here with you, your students, and your alumni. But to get back to your question, one of the things when we look at the data, it shows that a lot of people that have died from COVID have had pre-existing conditions. And that includes not only whether it's hypertension or diabetes or intellectual and even developmental disabilities, though that population has been adversely affected by COVID-19. One of the things that I believe COVID has really shown is that there is indeed a health gap in this country. And when you look at some of the underlying conditions that contribute to the morbidities, whether it's high blood pressure or diabetes or other things, it's the social determinants of health. So what I think COVID-19 has done is to show us that, one, in terms of dealing with the physicalities of what people are dealing with, it's important that we address that. Secondly, one of the things that COVID-19 did was to amplify the use of technology. Now, you'll find this interesting in that telehealth, the use of our smartphones, smart devices, we use them in our everyday lives, but the healthcare system has been a little resistant to using technology. And I have to admit that I feel more comfortable actually seeing my doctor and eye to eye in person, having them examine me. But what COVID-19 did for us, and Easterseals did this, was to use Zoom Health and other platforms to continue to provide the long-term services and supports that the people that we serve need. So I will say that technology has been a great leveler and a tool for us to use. And then the only other thing that I would say as it relates to COVID-19 and what Easterseals has done, we see this over and over again about the message of wearing masks, stay at home. And especially starting in March, we had a number of actors that we are affiliated with and have worked with Easterseals in our Disability Film Challenge that put together a PSA that said, stay at home. And one of the things that I don't think that people really understand is that you put others at risk who have underlying pre-existing conditions. Right. And that's something that I think that people don't really think about. It's not about just me, it's about you and how I affect you.
No, thanks. That's a very important message. Back to what you mentioned about technology. I mean, I think one of the things that surprised me, perhaps I shouldn't have been surprised, you talked about it as a leveler, but we've also seen in the last 10 months that with the digital divide, there has been sort of disparate access and potentially disparate outcomes. Do you see some of those effects too in the community you serve?
That's a great question. You're absolutely right. When I talk about Easterseals, my elevator speech is that we sit at the intersection of both healthcare and education, because not only do we serve the lifespan from early childhood intervention all the way to seniors, but we provide healthcare services. We actually provide speech, occupational, physical therapy. We provide nursing, hospice. We provide congregate living in terms of group homes, et cetera. But when it comes to the education piece, we work with special education, special needs children. We work and partner with school districts. Now, one of the things that has been studied over and over again is this whole concept of summer learning loss or achievement. Right. And what you see and the data shows is that Black and Brown children during the summer lose all of or a large percentage of the knowledge that they learned in the preceding school year. So when they get promoted to the next grade, they're still starting at a deficit. Now you take that with a special needs child, right, then that amplifies and aggravates the issue. And then when we're talking about remote learning, and you're telling a child with autism that they're supposed to sit still and focus, or a child, a child with ADHD, look at a computer screen for 6 hours. We are talking about an exponential, I think, impact longitudinally in terms of what we're going to see with kids as they grow up, a whole generation that has suffered. And I think it's going to have an impact on our economics and even leadership across the board.
There's a debate. I know and many in the audience know that there's a debate going on, and to have a more nuanced view. I mean, I'll take my own perspective here as an educator. The disparities that might exist among young kids and having those widen will have long run impacts, not just economic impacts, but health impacts. And in a way, I've been a little frustrated in that society has prioritized bars and restaurants. I personally would have loved to have seen prioritization of early childhood education because of the long run effects. I wonder if you have any thoughts both about prioritizing that from society's point of view and the leadership broadly in the country in terms of setting our priorities.
I think it absolutely is a priority, and we have to get it, and we need to understand that clearly. And one of the things, in fact, just before coming on to this session, I was on a Wall Street Journal CEO Council conference, and I was just leading a task force discussion with corporate CEOs from around the world in terms of what is the wish list for the incoming administration and what are some of the things that we need to address. But education clearly is one of those things, and some of the CEOs were talking about that we need to get in K through 12 and start helping kids in terms of STEM education. We need to expose children to the variety of careers. There were CEOs in well-known companies that you would know of in the tech industry that were saying, we need to start now with our children. And what and I'm going to speak now from a disability lens, but also from an African-American lens. And that is, if there's not intentionality around early childhood intervention and education, we are hurting ourselves as Americans. And then the only other thing I would say right quick as it relates to early childhood intervention, 1 million children a year start kindergarten with undiagnosed developmental disability. So think about that. 1 million kids a year start kindergarten with an undiagnosed intellectual or developmental disability. And then the statistics show that Black children actually go for 4 or 5 years before they're ever diagnosed. So you have 4 or 5 years, when your brain is developing and you have the ability to impact the brain's growth and the and just how things are being connected and the rewiring of the brain, which can be done at an early childhood stage. What again, a travesty for our country.
Yeah, no, and you've also talked about how the pandemic is dealt a setback to workplace equity for people with disabilities, not just educational, but can you speak a bit about that too?
Sure. So when we talk about the workforce, first of all, let's start with the fact that um, even though the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, was passed, and we celebrated its 30th year of passage this year in 2020,
Right.
You look at the numbers and people with disabilities are still not being hired. I think companies are concerned or falsely don't understand what accommodation means. They think that it's going to be expensive and we can't possibly hire somebody with disabilities. Or they think, well, if a person with disabilities needs special technology, how does that work? Or can we even trust people to work from home? Well, the pandemic has blown that way out of the water. Can
Right.
people work from home? We've had to do it, and we've been doing it, I would suggest, fairly successfully with the use of technology. But then when we look at employment rates, just before the pandemic, about 66% of people without disabilities had jobs, whereas only 19% of people with disabilities had jobs. And I could go on and on with statistics. One thing I will say, too, that in this Wall Street Journal CEO Summit I just finished, one of the things I talked about is that we could actually impact the GDP by $24 billion if we were just to employ 1% more of people with disabilities in this country. What a huge impact.
You know, along those lines, you mentioned 30 years ago, Easterseals was a leading advocate for the passage of the American Disabilities Act. And perhaps you could tell us, what progress we made, but it's pretty clear we haven't made all the progress we wished. And I know you have just promoted a new all-in initiative at Easterseals to make further progress. Perhaps you could tell us of how far we've come and how far you think we still need to go.
Yes. Well, one of the things when we think about the Americans with Disabilities Act, what it did was it was yet that next bastion of civil rights legislation that attempted to level the playing field around employment, healthcare, education. Here's something as an example that I always like to use, because when we bring everyone to the table, we all benefit. So something as simple as curb cutouts. How many of us now, when the Americans with Disabilities Act said we need to make streets and sidewalks accessible, that meant that you have that little slope in a curb so that you can cross the street, a wheelchair could cross the street, or a walking device. Now, how many of us use it when we're dragging our suitcases? We use the curb cutouts. Or how often do we see a person pushing a stroller using the curb cutout? How many of us get to a door and push that button that says handicap that opens up the doors automatically? We all take advantage and are a benefit from bringing everyone to the table. So with that, transitioning to what you just said about our Easterseals all-in 10-point disability plan, and I would encourage all of the participants today to go on the Easterseals website, easterseals.com, and look at that all-in disability plan. What we have done is to put together the research around what would it take for a company to be really equitable when it comes to disabilities. And what people don't realize is that disabilities are not just the physical disabilities, ones that you can see, but they are also invisible. It could be the mental health issues. People are suffer from being bipolar or schizophrenic or addictions or depressed. And then there are intellectual and developmental disabilities as well. But at the end of the day, there is an opportunity for us there's a continuum to look at pay gap issues, to look at how job descriptions are written? Are job descriptions written in a way that they say, we don't want you to apply? There could even be gender bias in the way job descriptions are written. So are you setting metrics around promotion and retention of diverse employees?
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. And you mentioned you also have beyond education, health. One of the trends, and you brought it up earlier, that we've seen here at UCLA is around telehealth, and there's discussion around having a permanent expansion of telehealth. Can you help us understand how this would benefit people with disabilities?
Yes. So something I didn't realize, of course, and I learned as a result of the pandemic, is the fact that the use of telehealth is not really embraced by insurance payors, and it is governed by states. So once the pandemic hit and people could not actually physically go to see their healthcare provider, they made an exception to the rules so that physicians could bill for seeing a client using a device, whether it's over the phone or whether it's a video conferencing, et cetera. But that's an exception to the rule that all states have put in place. One of the things that Easterseals is advocating is that this becomes a permanent fixture, that the use of telehealth should be allowed all of the time now. We see the benefits of it. We see the efficacy of it, that it does in fact work, and that people can get access to quality healthcare. And again, just going back to the fact that COVID revealed and surfaced that there are a number of systemic gaps in our systems, whether it's healthcare, education, et cetera. And so why don't we use telehealth in the healthcare space to start closing that divide?
And this leads into another initiative. It's hard to believe how many important things you're involved with. So, but I know you're involved with another initiative with 3 other Black female CEOs of the American Diabetes Association, the March of Dimes, and the Black Women's Health Imperative. And it specifically addresses issues of health and welfare of Black Americans. And I was wondering if you could help us understand what initiatives you are trying to promote and how we can and how they might close the gaps you just mentioned.
Well, thank you. One of the things that I decided to do is I was looking around and seeing, first of all, this is a little lesson I learned growing up. You can always point a finger at somebody else to accuse them, but you've got like 3 other fingers pointing back at yourself, right? So I had this moment in time during the pandemic. It's like, oh my gosh, look at the numbers. Black and brown people are dying from COVID. Oh, the system is broken, and on and on and on. And I was like, wait a second, Angela, you're part of the system. And I was like, ooh. So I thought, well, Easterseals, we have 67 affiliates operating in 48 states. We are a provider of services to people with disabilities, seniors. We operate group homes. We have inpatient, outpatient treatment facilities. And I thought, well, why don't I start with me? And then I thought, there are other Black women who are CEOs in the healthcare space, and what power would it be for us to come together? So I called each of them and said, "Hey, let's do something together." And we have more planned coming up in January. And I asked Allison Norland, who's with Forbes Women, if she wouldn't mind writing an article about what we're seeing as Black women in the health space. And so each of us came from our various lenses, but out of it, we're going to be developing a call to action. And the call to action is around what are the social determinants of health that impact Black Americans. It could be food insecurity. It could be access to transportation, access to appropriate health care. We're also talking about knowledge. Knowledge is key. If Black Americans don't know that they can get on, for example, on the through Easterseals and on our website, a free what is it? We call it ASQ. I'm trying to not use acronyms, but it's a make the first 5 count, where you can go on our website, answer a few developmental questions about your child, ages 0 to 5, and within 24 hours, someone from my staff will send back the results to flag if your child potentially has a developmental issue, and then we point you to where you can go for treatment. So that's something where there's an actual lack of awareness. Diabetes, again, understanding how to eat healthy, where you can go, where we have food deserts, who can we partner with to deal with those issues. Make March of Dimes, and maternal health is really important. So when you have a mother who's having issues and doesn't understand appropriate maternal health, then that leads to a child that may have issues and disabilities, which is where Easterseals comes in. So as we began to talk, we saw how we interconnected, and we said, let's list for Congress, let's list for the incoming administration what it is we think that needs to happen and to address these issues.
You know, one of the things that we are talking a lot about in management schools these days is the role of business in society. And we, very traditional view for a long time is that the objective of a corporation is to maximize shareholder wealth. And as you know, the Business Roundtable and others are now promoting a different view of a broader set of stakeholders that we should be concerned about. You mentioned in these initiatives, which are incredibly important from society's point of view, partnering with government and perhaps other nonprofits, but perhaps you could tell us the role that corporations, businesses can play in promoting these very important social programs.
So what I found, and this has been going on, but it's really just the uptick is absolutely incredible. But I've had the opportunity to work with Fortune 500 companies to launch even their employee resource groups. For example, Dow Jones asked me to come and launch their disability employment resource group, but they also wanted me to talk to their African American employee resource group, and so I've been working with them, and they've been great in terms of publishing things around disability, and I have a great working relationship with their editors. Comcast, NBC Universal had me do a fireside chat recently, but they've been a longtime partner of Easterseals. They've also worked with us in terms of disability. They've provided funds for us to do assistive technology. And so now we're able to use 3D printers and other things to create devices for people with disabilities that are customized. But also they've partnered with their incredibly smart engineers and technology people to work with us. Another great example, Abbott Labs called them post George Floyd and said, hey, what do you all, Abbott Labs, want to do when it comes to early childhood intervention? So they are partnering with us around our Black Child Fund that we've created to really help Easterseals reach out into to the Black community to do the early diagnosis. Another example is Genworth Financial. They're the number one company when it comes to long-term care insurance products. That CEO reached out to me and said, hey, Angela, I want a more diverse workforce. Can Easterseals work with us as a vendor to start hiring more veterans and people with disabilities? And I could go on and on and on.
That's wonderful.
Speaking with the Assistant Secretary of the Department of Veterans Affairs, we have a call, I think, tomorrow to work on an MOU together. But businesses clearly understand, again, what I said, that everyone needs to be represented at the table. There is no more excuse for having corporate boards. And I think you probably saw, just like I did, NASDAQ's announcement last week about diversity on corporate boards. And so companies set the tone at the top with their boards and CEOs, but also there's an opportunity at all levels to really have all voices represented.
That's great, and this reminds me of a quote that that you've said. You say you bring to each position an outlook on life where diversity is valued, inclusivity is a must, and equity is what it's all about. And how does that inform your work at Easterseals and really in all the wonderful work that you're doing?
Well, I want to talk a little bit about just like all of this stems from who I am and my own core value system and how I've shown up throughout my life and my life experiences. And I think that when you look at my work background, it seems strange and odd.
I'm going to talk about that later because it's an interesting path.
It is. But it all leads to me at this point in time and my core values of caring, honesty, respect, and responsibility. And with me being an ordained minister as well as a lawyer, and here I sit at this moment in time, which I consider to be divine intervention. I had to throw that in, to be a voice and an advocate for people with disabilities. But that's 1 in 4 Americans in this country. That's 61 million people, and disability could affect all of us, whether it's through illness, whether it's through birth, whether it's through an accident or sickness. So again, sitting at this moment in time, I see myself as an advocate for this group of individuals that have yet to see fully embraced in society, to live, learn, work, and play. And that's who I am. And I think I probably went around your question. So sorry about that.
No, that's okay. I mean, I'll sort of ask a slightly different one along the same lines. You've been advocating for diversity, and you mentioned this earlier in the boardroom and on executive teams. And help us make the business case for that. The value of having diversity in the boardroom, diversity in the C-suite, for promoting all the various objectives of an organization.
Well, I just take a pure corporate lens. First of all, corporations exist with creating products, and you're creating products for a consumer. So understanding who your consumers are, understanding consumer trends, and then innovating and creating products to maximize shareholder value, to grow revenue. All of that's important. But if you can't do it from a diverse lens, then you're missing something. Your products and your innovations miss the mark. So can I give you an example?
Absolutely. Yes. Thanks.
Own household, because I think stories really show this. So my husband and I did a rehab, and I saw this really neat Kohler faucet where it has a light under, so it's touchless. And all you do is put your hand under it, and the faucet comes on. Put your hand on it, faucet turns off. Well, brand new, spent a lot of money on this rehab, and the faucet wasn't working. So a friend of ours who is a designer and does restaurants, he said, well, you know what? Maybe your faucet actually doesn't recognize your color because it's too dark. And I laughed it off, but then I was like, you know what? Even when you're talking about assistive technology and
right.
AI, who are the technology folks that are creating the systems? And do they look like me? Or as they're testing the systems, do they represent me? So again, that's just a simple example.
Yeah.
But hey, if we don't have different abilities and different lenses in our corporations and not in our government and all sectors, we're missing something.
Yeah.
And I just want to say, I don't want to call out Kohler. I'm just. Yeah.
It's a very good example. And you've talked about this too, not just in the corporate boardroom, but really also among elected officials. And there you can think of myriad examples where it's critical to really understand perspectives and needs of different members of our community. How do you promote that? How does Easterseals promote better boardroom representation, better representation among elected officials. These are very lofty and important goals, but how do you actually promote that?
Well, I'll start with the government first, and advocacy is important for all of us, no matter what sector you're in, corporate or the nonprofit sector. We're all advocating at the federal level in Washington, D.C., but also at the state level. And what's important is elevating the issues that are critical to the populations that we serve and the people that we represent. And so we spend a lot of time making phone calls. We spend time in Washington, D.C. showing up. And we most recently, Easterseals has partnered with a number of other disability organizations to put together a legislative priority list with details so that staffers on the Hill, when their representative, senator or congressperson, is looking at legislation and they want to know, what does the disability community think? They have a book that outlines clearly some of the things that we're talking about. I just had a call where I was invited last week to put together a panel for the Congressional Black Caucus in January, and they would like for us to actually, and the other 3 Black women CEOs in healthcare, to talk about healthcare and to have a live panel. So we're going to really be doing that. But then also at the state level, it's important for advocacy because constituents need to have their voices elevated and raised, and we do that with PSAs, especially when it came to the census, getting the votes counted and all of that. I spent a lot of time being interviewed on nightly news to talk about the disability community and how we're showing up and what poll sites, for example, needed to do to make sure that they were accessible.
Wow, that's interesting. That's wonderful, yeah. I want to get back to, you have a really interesting background, and your education includes degrees in law and divinity, and you've spent time as a military prosecutor, an officer in the Judge Advocate General Corps. How did all these disparate experiences impact your career and your leadership style?
I'll start with, if you don't mind, before getting into my career, because it starts with my parents. I was born in South Carolina, and my dad was a Baptist pastor and decided to join the Navy. And this was in the 1960s at the height of the Civil Rights Movement. And he was also at that time the head of the NAACP for the state of South Carolina. And so in the 60s, late 60s, we drove a blue Ford Fairlane across country on I-10 from South Carolina to Southern California, specifically San Diego, where my dad was first stationed. So for me, it was going from Anderson, South Carolina, in a predominantly Black environment, to Southern California, San Diego, where there weren't a lot of folks that looked like me. But growing up in a military background, living on military bases where you move every 3 years, you are surrounded by a diverse group of families that you live with, play with, go to school with. It was a natural thing for me to consider going into the military. So was an ROTC student at the University of Virginia, scholarship recipient, was commissioned as an officer in the Air Force. But what the Air Force did, and most of my life being in the military and around military, was this whole notion of discipline. And then understanding, and I would say logistics, and I would understand, and I would also say disruption. So understanding, being flexible, disruption, disciplined, logistics, and knowing that at any moment you have to react to a new way of being or something happening. And especially like when I was in Desert Storm on active duty at the time, just being situationally aware. And that's what the military is, I think, the best teacher in leadership. But also, it's understanding teamwork. In the military, we understood, and I was in the Air Force, we understood that the pilots were, okay, they were the jocks, right? They could get in the planes, fly these bombers and jets and blah, blah, blah. But those planes weren't taking off. That technician that was not fixing those planes and making sure everything was in order. So in the military, you understand what it takes for teams to work together. You understood what the target was, what the goal was, and then it was important as a team to execute. So I think that really shaped how I've moved through my career and how I work together, and the ability to cast vision, the ability to then to set goals, and then from there, how do you achieve what you're aiming to achieve?
And did you find those qualities especially valuable in the last 9-10 months during this crisis?
Of course not. I mean, yes, absolutely pivoting. In fact, it was so funny because I think my last trip was in Washington, D.C. on a plane back on the first or second week in March. Anyway, I started reading the news. I said, you know what, this thing is coming. And so I went to my IT team. I said, look, I need you to make sure that everybody can work from home, check their computers, make sure we're ready to go. And they're like, oh, Angela, really? My leadership team, like, oh, you're just worried. I said, trust me, this is my military kicked in. I said, no, there's something coming. Let's be prepared. Let's be ready. And literally on a dime, we were able to pivot. And I think that was important. So that's COVID-19. And I have to say that we as an organization have continued to thrive and do well, even despite what's been going on externally.
Yeah. Well, are you looking for those same qualities in your team? Are there specific qualities you look for when you're putting together, the core of your team?
One of the things too, I would say the answer is absolutely yes. And what I look for is, I don't want to be the smartest person in the room. And let's just start there. And then secondly, what I want is people like me that are utility players, that we have an expertise, that if you come to me, you want to know about criminal and circumstantial evidence and trial law and all of that and military law, there are things that I can tell you, or corporate compliance and ethics, I can do that. Putting a corporate compliance plan together for a corporation, I know how to do that. And there are things that I know how to do as a lawyer, and I'm good and I can go deep. But then I'm also a utility player in that I'm able to do other things. I can be a fundraiser. I can be a speaker. I can write grants. And then what I want from my team is, you need to be a subject matter expert in something and fill that gap, but also be a utility player and have a lens and be able to contribute in other ways.
Yeah, great. One of our students submitted a question and asking, what's the most important risk you've taken, and why was that so important in your career development?
I would say actually leaving the corporate sector and going into the nonprofit sector. Let me tell you a personal story. So I left Sears and I worked for President Bush and President Clinton on their Bush-Clinton-Katrina fund. And so as I was doing that work, I was thinking about what's my next career. So Goldman Sachs called and said, hey, we want you to come to New York. We want to talk to you about compliance and maybe finding a job for you here. There was no job. They just wanted to talk and potentially create something. So I was flying back and forth to New York and talking to Goldman Sachs. Then all of a sudden I get this call like, hey, Angela, would you consider working with Arne Duncan, who went on under the Obama administration to be Secretary of Education, but to be his chief of staff. And at that time, he was the head of the Chicago public school system.
Right.
So I came home, I was like, oh my gosh, I was telling my husband, I have Goldman Sachs, I have Arne Duncan and Chicago Public School. And my husband's like, well, what are you going to do? I was like, well, Goldman Sachs and Chicago Public Schools, the education. And I was like, wow, I'm really torn. He's like, Angela, all that glitters isn't gold. And I was like, yeah, but it's Goldman Sachs. He said, Angela, all that glitters isn't gold. I said, yeah, but it's Goldman Sachs. And so for the first time in my career, I actually took a pad of paper, put a line down the middle, and started writing pros and cons. Now, it's like, okay, really? Long story short, here I am in the nonprofit sector, and really glad to be here. So it's just one of those things where you have to tap into what is your core. And at that moment in time, my core was, how can I lend my skill set, my passion to help the youth in this country?
I'd love to hear more about, our students more and more are seeking, purposeful careers. It's, that I think, I don't want to say that was never a consideration, but more and more the kinds of companies they want to work with, the kinds of nonprofits that they want to work for, they want to serve others, they want to do something for the community and so on. And help sort of perhaps elaborate on what you just talked about, the importance of pursuing your passion and serving others in true fulfillment. I know it's something that drives a lot of people in education, but help us understand how those pursuits have really enriched you.
Well, one of the things is I've always said that life is too short to be miserable. So why on earth would you stay in a job that is absolutely miserable? I encourage people to, one, find their passions, work on finding out what your purpose is, and then I also encourage people to really list out, what are you good at? And if you're really good at something, then how do you leverage that or parlay that into a job? And of course, we all need money to survive, and we have to work. But how do you do it in a way that it's not always easy? I don't always wake up and think, "Oh, yay! It's another day at Easterseals." I love what I do. I love the organization, but sometimes, like, oh my gosh, I'm tired. But we all find ourselves in that way. But I think it's so important, and now more than ever, and we know how precious life is, that I encourage students, I encourage people generally, identify what your skill sets, what gives you great passion. And then even if you're in a Fortune 500, 1000 or whatever company, you still can be a force for good. And you can be that voice that causes the company to even do things and partner with nonprofits or do things that benefit not only the employees, but society.
Yeah. When I think about pursuing the kind of career that you pursued, there must, and reaching the levels that you've reached, which is extraordinary. What were the sort of formative experiences that were really critical to you that you think got you to where you are right now?
Okay, so I'm putting my minister hat to say I believe in divine intervention, and that's number one. But secondly, I have always believed in, and this is again instilled from my parents and then in the military, that you have to do your best. And having this whole spirit of excellence and never saying no, having that grit, as people talk about, or people talk about leaning in or just being resilient. All of those things are who I am, and went into me being a risk taker. If there's a hurricane and I'm near an ocean, I'm the one that's like, well, I just want to see the waves, I'll leave before it gets really bad. and I have done that. And one time I was standing on a hotel balcony and gripping the rails, and the wind was blowing. My husband's like, what are you doing? Get in. But it's just about risk taking and just being willing to be flexible. We all have to be flexible. Gone are the days where you can count on tomorrow being the same as today.
I have another question from one of the students. Are there events like the Easterseals Disability Film Challenge that you're looking to support in the future to promote your mission?
Yes. So the Easterseals Disability Film Challenge, if people are not aware, is basically an opportunity for people with disabilities, either in front of the camera or behind the camera, to do a short film, anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes. And we then show that, and we have a number of actors and producers and screenwriters, et cetera, that in Hollywood that work with us, and we select the best film. But what it does is it feeds into our purpose statement, which is to define the way and change the way people view disability. Mm-hmm. And media is the way to do it. So our Easterseals Disability Film Challenge is the way that we're really trying to partner with Hollywood to change disability and to show people with disabilities in an authentic way. We just most recently signed an agreement with Netflix to work with them, and they've invited us to not only conduct trainings with their company, but also to populate a database that they wanted to create with people with disabilities, that either as actors or behind the camera. So I think that media is the great way of changing society and society's viewpoints on certain things.
That's wonderful. And one of the themes, and you've touched on this in some of your responses, but one of the consistent themes that we've heard in this speaker series is that recent events in particular have accelerated trends that were already apparent. And you've talked about some of them. Where are some of what are some of the directions you see your organization going that really were pushed forward over say the last year or so?
I would go back to technology, because everyone has had to use technology and to shift. And what we've also seen in the work environment is that people can work remotely and still be successful. So by launching our all-in disability plan, what we're saying to employers is that, hey, technology can work and it can work effectively. We are trying to put people back to work, and people with disabilities are a core group of that. And we're including veterans in that, because we also not only serve people, seniors. We have a program called the Senior Community Service Employment Program, where we partner with the Department of Labor to put seniors back to work, but also we work to put veterans back to work and others with disabilities. So again, I think technology and advocating that, telehealth obviously is something that's really important.
Great. Let me ask in our last few minutes some questions that are specific to what we're doing here at Anderson. Are there when you see people coming out of MBA programs or coming out of undergraduate programs that you might hire, are there a certain set of skills that you think we're not doing enough to develop, or are there things that that you think are really valuable that we're, in the higher education system, we're not putting enough emphasis on?
Do you really want me to say that?
We're here to learn.
Well, let me just say this. I don't know about your curriculum, but I know it's world renowned. You all are one of the best institutions. One of the things I think, though, that's really important for anyone is to focus even on the social, emotional place where people are, understanding that it's not just about getting paid, getting a title, that it's about how do you show up to work and in a way that is authentic. How do you show up in a way that is welcoming? We hear a lot now about unconscious bias and unconscious bias training. So it would be wonderful if business schools like yours were to have some sort of curricula that address that and made people aware. And I know people are very sensitive and come out every which way around that topic, but that's something that I think certainly is important.
Yeah, and let me conclude with a question. I think that would be, your response would be very valuable to our students currently. You've spoken about the importance of resilience, and you've demonstrated it in your distinguished career. Our students right now are, facing a pretty challenging environment. This has been a very difficult time for them in the last 10 months, not just going through our program, but, the career opportunities are not what they were a year ago. What could you say to our students to help them through this very challenging time?
First of all, I would say hang in there. Second of all, I would say that this is a unique moment in history. And what a time for you to say that you are in school getting your MBA, graduating, and that you have an opportunity to really shape the destiny and future of this country and this world. I would say think out of the box. Think about opportunities that would not be your traditional pathway. Think about social entrepreneurship. Be willing to take risks. Be willing to do something that you never going into the MBA program thought you would want to do. Think about sectors that you had never ever thought about. So one of the things I would say is to be flexible, be resilient. Don't worry if it doesn't happen the first time the way you want it. Keep going, keep going. Never say never. And my favorite phrase is just get it done.
Well, that's wonderful, and I so appreciate that you spent the time with us today. I always like to leave the last words to our distinguished guests. We covered a lot of ground, but happy to let you conclude with any thoughts or any other piece of advice you might have for our audience.
Well, I just want to say thank you again for the opportunity to be with you all. And I just want to say to your students that you all are unique. And I know that at times you may be suffering in silence, and you may be thinking, why is this happening at this moment in time? And what am I going to do? And you may not even feel like you have a safety net or someone to support you. And I just want you to say that I want to say to you that it's going to be okay. And I also want to just extend the invitation for anyone to reach out to me personally. My email is awilliams@easterseals.com. And you can always go to our website, but hook up with me on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, but let's stay connected. I'm here for you. I want to encourage you, stay strong and be your best self.
You've been so inspirational today. I so appreciate your time. We are going to have to get together again sometime soon. I thank you so much, Angela, and I know our audience benefited enormously from our time today. Thank you so much, and thank you to all and everyone. Please stay safe.
Thank you. Bye.